Trojans Talk Research is a monthly spotlight on the research interests of choice faculty presented by Troy University's Office of Sponsored Programs. This month features Dean of the Sorrell College of Business, Dr. Judson Edwards, along with Dr. Robert Carden, President of the Commonwealth Transfusion Foundation, presenting a structural and economic overview of the U.S. blood industry.
For the past few years, I've been doing most of the work in terms of research in the area of the blood industry. And so I currently serve as the editor-in-chief of the Journal for Blood Service Economics, which is published out of the UK, Emerald Publishing. And it is a fascinating topic to me as an economist because it goes against everything that I've probably ever been taught about how a market works. It's really interesting. The title of our presentation, and I'm, of course, let Dr. Carden introduce himself. Anybody who knows me knows I love 80s music, so I took the pleasure of doing The Land of Confusion as the lead for this industry because there is nothing that says it better than it is the land of confusion. I was also pleased to find out we had an O-neg donor. Anybody here O negative? We have one. And that sounds about right, because what, the U.S. population, about 6% O-neg donors. But in the world of blood donation, that is like pure gold, like she's a superstar right now. They will wear her out.
Sell you some right now.
Selling your blood, that's going to be part of this conversation today. But anyways, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Card, let him introduce himself. And kind of our style for this today is when we were looking at different topics to discuss, I'm not so sure what it means to talk about in-depth issues in the blood industry if you really don't understand the basics. And I think for most people, you have no clue about how the industry works and how it's structured. Most of you have probably donated your blood and it goes and you're just saying, hey, I hope it goes, to serve someone well, right? But there's a lot more to it than that. So hope you'll enjoy the presentation, ask questions, and we'll see if there's anything at the end you'd like to talk about. But I'll turn it over to Dr. Carden.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Edwards. I'm Bob Carden, and for the past 30 years or so, I have worked in the industry of chaos that Dr. Edwards has mentioned. I was 25 years at Virginia Blood Services, which we were the blood supplier for Virginia. And we sold the blood service, or for those of you in accounting and taxation, it was a sole member substitution with cash consideration, just to get it technically correct. But we sold Virginia Blood Services back in 2013 and created a private foundation, Commonwealth Transfusion Foundation, which I am the president and CEO of that. And we support scholarships and research in the transfusion medicine industry. So again, I've been in this crazy industry for 30 years, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time just kind of describing to you what the industry is, making sure that we're all on the same page, and then we'll get into the chaos. Let's talk about first what a blood center is, because a lot of people think the blood center is the plasma center. They're two different things. A blood center is a nonprofit, generally a nonprofit organization licensed by the Food and Drug Administration, and they deliver products to hospital blood banks for transfusion. When you give your O-neg, you're donating that blood for a transfusible product that will go to the blood bank. Not to be confused with the plasma centers that are the people that the students are selling plasma to in order to buy beer. They're completely different. That's a for-profit industry, and that's not what we're talking about today. Their products generally, I like to think of them as their products generally go to the pharmacy in the hospital in the form of injectables. So the industry that we're talking about is the nonprofit industry that you see the buses pull up on campus, they collect your blood, and it goes to the blood bank. The blood centers recruit volunteer donors, they collect blood, they do manufacturing, they take your blood and they make it into 3 or 4 different components and deliver them to the hospital blood bank. Next one. Let's go on to the next one. We've already talked about not confusing it with the pharmacy. Blood centers that, like, again, you see the bus pull up out here, it might be a Red Cross or Life South, I don't know who comes here. But blood centers range in size from small ones with about 19 million in revenues to large systems like Vitalant with over 700 million in revenue annually. So different sizes, they range in size from different collections. You can see that we have many that are below 30,000 in collections, a lot between 50 and 100, but when we get out to over 1 million in collections, there's only a couple of systems. That would be Vitalant and the Red Cross. We're going to get into the fun stuff in just a minute. We have blood centers that are just standalone. For example, Virginia Blood Services was a standalone community blood center, and then we have large systems like Vitalant, One Blood, New York Blood Center, Versity, that have many community blood centers that report up to the main office. Next, Dr. Edwards. Now we're getting into it. There are two main players in the industry. A lot of people think when we talk about blood donations that the Red Cross is the only entity that collects blood. That's not the case. The Red Cross collects about 40%, and the rest of it is collected by non-Red Cross centers, which we in the industry call independent centers. They're independent of the Red Cross. Next slide. And so now we're getting into the fun. We've introduced what a blood center is. It's the organization that collects your blood, your volunteer blood. Well, it used to be volunteer blood. Dr. Edwards is going to talk about that. But collects blood from volunteer donors, and it goes to the hospital blood bank. There are two main players, the Red Cross and the independents. That's what we want to be familiar with as we look at a chaotic system. Next slide. All right, so blood banking really got its start in the United States at the end of World War II. It was during World War II that it was discovered that transfusions were very valuable on the battlefield, and the American Red Cross was in charge of working with Britain to collect blood. Well, as hospitals around the country in the U.S. were watching this new medical experiment, if you will, taking place on the battlefield, they said, hey, that's working on the battlefield, let's bring it here to our hospitals. And the Red Cross was not in every market, so the independent centers started springing up in all different kind of places, like Virginia, where I'm from. It was a non-Red Cross center that sprang up. And at the end of World War II, as the war ended, the Red Cross said, well, war's over, we'll take over the blood system, we'll nationalize it now. And the independents said, not so fast. We don't think we want to be part of your system. We like running our own little system, so we'll just keep it as it is. And the competition started heating up between the independents and the American Red Cross. So in 1947, all these little independent centers came together and they formed the American Association of Blood Banks. And the purpose of it, well, the stated purpose was to do scientific and medical research, but the real purpose of it was so that these centers could get together and compete with the American Red Cross. Next one. In 1940, that was in 1947. Eventually, over time, the American Association of Blood Banks started letting physicians come into the organization. They started letting hospitals come in, and eventually they allowed the Red Cross to come in. So they were set up to compete with the Red Cross, but eventually let them into the tent. So several of these centers got together and said, well, this didn't work out like we thought, so they spun out the Council of Community Blood Centers, CBCC. Next one. And their job was to compete with the American Red Cross. And they eventually changed their name to America's Blood Centers, which is what they go by today. Next slide. And this is where it starts getting crazy. Let me get over so I can get my dates right. Yeah, in 1988, several of the centers from America's Blood Centers decided they were looking at the Red Cross and they said they're getting a lot better prices on blood bags, reagent, test kits because they're putting all of their volume together and they're negotiating as a purchasing group. We need to do that. Well, the members of America's Blood Center said, we're not really interested in doing that. So 9 centers, mine was one of them, spun off Blood Centers of America. It gets really crazy. Blood Centers of America, America's Blood, and everything goes by acronyms. So this is known as BCA, ABC, AABB, which works with the FDA, the IRS, and everybody else. So BCA was spun off, and it was a group purchasing organization. And we 9 centers put our volume together, and we negotiated. And we started getting better prices, and BCA was phenomenally successful. And so several members of ABC said, we want to be part of your group purchasing organization. Well, we were smart and said, no. What you can do is you can purchase off of our contracts. We'll let you do that because the more you buy, the more rebates we get. So we were making money off of their purchases. Well, that worked well for many years until a whole group of them got together, and I want to get the year for that. Oh, in 2002, a group of them got together and said, well, wait a minute. We don't like purchasing off of BCA contracts. We'll form our own. So they formed Group Services for America's Blood Centers. And it was a group purchasing organization. So now what we have is two group purchasing organizations, both of whom belong to America's Blood Centers and both of whom belong to the American Association of Blood Banks. All right. After about 6 years of trying to operate on their own, they said, wait a minute, we're duplicating services, so we'll just fold into Blood Centers of America. And they folded into Blood Centers of America. Now let's keep in mind that all members of BCA belong to ABC, belong to AABB. All right? Next slide, Dr. Edwards. Well, as all of these, as group services for ABC merged into Blood Centers of America, several centers said, well, wait a minute. We don't like this because, we started out as 9, now we're 40-something. We want to spin off because we don't have that nimbleness that we used to have. Now, keep in mind that a group purchasing organization, you are an owner of that. You're making money off of those purchases. Well, these guys spin off. There's 13 of these in the Alliance of Community Transfusion Services. They spun off. So now they're doing group purchasing as part of ACTS. And they're also doing group purchasing as part of Blood Centers of America. And they also belong to America's Blood Centers. And they also belong to the American Association of Blood Banks. Not to be outdone, there was another group of, how many? There's 8 to be precise. So, well, they're pretty successful, but we don't like all the players in that. So we'll form our own. So they formed the National Blood Collaborative to do group purchasing, which they were already doing through Blood Centers of America. So now we have these organizations, both belonging to Blood Centers of America, belonging to America's Blood Centers, and belonging to the American Association of Blood Banks. It gets crazier. We're just getting started. AABB emerged as the 800-pound gorilla in the blood industry. It's got the Red Cross in it. It's got all these centers in it. And it's recognized by Congress as it's an accrediting body. It's international in scope. And it is truly the 800-pound gorilla. Well, it formed the Interorganizational Task Force on Domestic Terrorism and Events. And the next slide, Judson, if you will. This slide is from the website. Everybody participated in this interorganizational task force. When you have a 9/11 or a school shooting, the purpose of this task force was to respond to that. And it has everybody in it. It has America's Blood Centers in it. It has the American Hospital Association, the American Red Cross, Blood Centers of America, the plasma guys that participate in it. And from the government, you have the Armed Services Program, Health and Human Services, CDC, the FDA. Everybody participates in the Interorganizational Task Force on Domestic Terrorism. And it worked really well. When I was running the Blood Center, we would have drills from time to time. There would be a simulation of a disaster, and we would see how quickly centers could respond. Next slide. You can guess what happened. These guys over here said, well, wait a minute. Maybe they're not going to respond fast enough, so we'll form the Blood Emergency Response Corps, BERC. And it competes with the Interorganizational Task Force on Domestic Disasters and Terrorism. And there are like 37 members of this at this point in time, I think. 36 members of BERC. And it competes with the Interorganizational Task Force on Domestic Terrorism. Now, when I talk to people and ask them, like, why do you see the need? Well, it's not nimble enough. It's just not nimble enough. Next slide. Oh, yeah, now we're really getting insane. Okay, so let's just keep in mind, I just want to backtrack for a second. All members of BERC are members of one of these two organizations, are members of Blood Centers of America, are members of BCA, and are members of the American Association of Blood Banks. When do you find time to run your blood center? Because you're gone all the time. Well, the American Association of Blood Banks has its medical directors group. Within each blood center, there's a medical director, and the medical directors get together and they formulate policy statements for the Food and Drug Administration. When the FDA is contemplating a new rule, they'll put out and ask for statements on it. And AABB was doing a very effective job of being the spokesperson. It had the Red Cross, it had the hospitals, it had all the independents in it. But you know, we really need to speak for ourselves. So America's Blood Centers formed its medical directors group to get together and meet. Now keep in mind that most blood centers only have one medical director. Next. Not to be outdone, Blood Centers of America formed its medical directors group. Now keep in mind that I'll generic blood center, I don't want to embarrass anyone, but generic blood center in Peoria, there's not a blood center in Peoria that I know of, has a medical director, and that medical director now belongs to the ABC Medical Directors Group and the BCA Medical Directors Group. Next slide. Give me the next one. If you think that blows your mind, this is from the ABC newsletter. Next one. This is from the America's Blood Centers newsletter. On July 31st, the BCA Medical Directors were going to meet in St. Louis from 9 to 5. The very next day, the America's Blood Centers medical directors were going to meet for the next 2 days in the same location. So one day I walk in as medical director of Blood Centers of America, and I meet all day, and the next day I walk in as the medical director of America's Blood Centers and talk about the same thing we just talked about yesterday. But this time we talk about it for 2 days, not just one. Next slide. And it just gets crazier from there. We have ITSE, which is an IT group. We have the National Blood Testing Cooperative. There's a captive insurance company. This is what your blood system in the United States looks like. It's just absolutely insane. Next slide, Judson. This is what our neighbors to the north look like. The Canadian Blood Services was nationalized many years ago, and it really struck home with me how effective they are when I was part of a think tank by one of the manufacturers, and several of us went in a room, and the sponsor of the session would ask a question like, well, what do you think the percentage of whatever? And we would all scratch our head. So the other thing about it is none of these blood centers talk to the other blood center. So we don't know how much blood's in the system at any point in time. We have a vague understanding of how many units are transfused, but that's all done through sampling. As Dr. Edwards is going to talk about, there's no place to report actual transfusions or no place to report actual collections. It's all voluntary. So we kind of sit around with scratching our heads and say, well, I think it might be. The Canadian guy was sitting there on a laptop and he had an instant answer. This is Canadian Blood Services compared to the mess that we just saw. Dr. Edwards. Again, this just kind of summarizes it. So there's 47 members of America's Blood Centers who all belong to AABB. Of those, 41 of them belong to ABC, 16 and 8 belong to BCA and to ABC, and they all belong to America's Association of Blood Banks, which is now, it was American Association of Blood Banks, then it just became AABB. It is now the Association for the Advancement of Blood and Biotherapies. So this is what the industry looks like. Dr. Edwards, next slide. So what Dr. Edwards and I are talking about is trying to get a grip on is what's the cost of all this duplication. We know that there's direct costs. They pay dues to each one of these organizations. These organizations all have a director running them. They pay dues, they travel to meetings, they love to go to meetings, so they're traveling to meetings constantly. What's the indirect cost? What's the cost of being gone? What are my opportunity costs? What are my transactional costs? But the other thing, the big question to me is how all of this affects product, service, and delivery. You know, when you've got two organizations competing in a disaster, you're just running all over each other, you know, trying to respond. And so these are the concerns that Dr. Edwards and I are trying to address. And Dr. Edwards, I'm going to let you pick up from here, and I can run the screen if you want me to. Just
Wonderful.
Okay.
So that's a little confusing, right, of how all this works. So I was thinking about and Bob, chime in here whenever you want, of when the first time you and I interacted about the blood industry was when Bob was trying to decide whether to sell CTF off or to stay in business.
Right.
And a lot of it was using kind of economic theory to make that decision. When I started getting into this industry, some of the things that were just completely backwards for me were as an economist, and we have how many in the room? I'm sorry, I'm the only one in the room, so I get to bore you with that. You know, we use prices, we use market to help, you know, your influence in human behavior. Prices influence your decision making every day. And it was a shock, a complete shock to me to learn that hospitals pay the same price for a unit of O negative blood as they do a unit of A positive blood. They don't pay a blood center any different price, which is crazy. I mean, if the O neg, I'm sorry, pointed to you, but if you know, if you're O neg and you're 6% of the U.S. population, it only makes sense that what you have in the marketplace, because it's the most versatile. Because one of the first things we kind of looked into was I had this obsession with learning about physician behavior. How are you going? Of course, if I'm a physician working in an emergency room, I'm going to grab that bottle. You can tell where my mind. You can tell where my mind was. And anyway, you know, a bag of blood. I'm going to do O neg because it's the safest thing for me to do in the room. But there's instances where a unit of A positive would work just as well as O negative. But there's nothing on that side to influence their behavior at all. And so if I'm a hospital, you know, understanding the relationship between, you know, the blood centers that are selling primarily to hospitals or surgical centers, they're all sold on consignment. So there's no guarantee that I'm even going to use the blood that I'm providing to you, and what you don't use, I have to take back, and you don't have to pay me for it. So from a business standpoint, think about just the fixed cost that goes into preparing one unit of blood for someone to be able to use. Every unit has to be tested. I mean, the testing cost, you know, every time they add a new test to the system, that costs more money. Blood bags, they cost money. And so every unit that they're taking in from donor volunteers, they're processing it. So there's all of these fixed costs, and there's really no guarantee that it will be used. And so then what happens? I get the blood back. And if Bob's holding blood at VBS, he's got to decide, you know, I may have to sell that to another blood center or another market. And so we have all these blood centers that worry about competition, right? They don't want, you know, they have their service area, and that's their area, and they don't want cheap blood coming into their area, but they're the ones doing it to themselves because they're selling those excess units to somebody else. It's just so bizarre because really structurally it's an oligopoly in just basic, boring economic terms, because what happens is American Red Cross is setting the price. They're setting the price all the time. They lead prices. The rest of these independent blood centers are nothing but price followers. That's all they do. And so whenever Red Cross moves, we were talking about this morning. I said, when was the last time they raised prices? We were at a conference in near Atlanta. I'm trying to remember. Can't remember the name of the place, but they made a decision to make a price adjustment that day. I was driving home, and the next thing I know, I had an email clicking from some places. They'd raised their prices up to match Red Cross. So they truly just follow the price. So you can see, and we'll talk about some of these numbers, but this whole idea of kind of mapping demand and mapping supply and prices, it creates super, super tight margins for all of these blood centers to operate under. And so there's been so many things in the industry, and we'll look back at some of these changes, but probably the one that concerned me most that happened over the past few years was the testing situation, because of course, in terms of economies of scale, you had these large blood testing centers that you'd fly your blood in and have it tested and ship back out. Some blood centers, I guess, still do their own testing. But one of the concerns was with Red Cross being clearly the lead industry, they partnered with another company to create the largest testing center, control of basically 75% of all blood testing in the U.S. So guess what that means for all these independent blood centers? You know, they're using the scale of business to lower the cost for Red Cross blood, so they're increasing their margins. I mean, it's really, I kind of see it as a competition issue. And so anyways, it's just been fascinating for me to think about what, from a market standpoint, how this changes. Luckily, some of the things have happened. I know some blood centers are now having differential pricing for O-neg units versus A-positive units, but for a long time that didn't happen. This slide pretty much is just showing you the number of red blood cells that were distributed and transfused. And you can see over these years, this is from 92 to 2021, about the whole idea of collection versus what's actually being used. And so if you look at the transfused units, you could see this gap, between how many units were actually being collected and how many were being used. And so over the years, if you look down to those margins, you can see how it has just really gotten closer and closer to, what they're actually using and collecting. All right, I'm going to ask Bob to talk about this because this is he can give a better economic example than I can on this, because I will sound just like Ed Merkel in 1995 giving you this example. And so we'll let Dr. Carden tell you about his experience with using these supply and demand curves.
So I'll just be very brief with this. Again, I was president of Virginia Blood Services, and I kept looking out in the future at what was happening. And for those of you that are the economists in the room, you know that there's movement along the supply and demand curves, and there's movement of the supply and demand curves when there are changes in quantity and demand that is not related to price. And what we were seeing was two things happening. One, we were seeing on the demand side that the demand for blood was going down. The hospitals were getting smart. As the prices of blood went up, hospitals started getting smart and saying, if you're coming in for surgery, why don't you stop taking your blood thinner, before you come in? You might not bleed as much. You might not need as much blood. They started doing patient blood management programs. It used to be that when your hemoglobin hit a certain value, 10, transfuse 2 units. Why 10? I don't know. It might be 10 for me. It might be 8 for Roger. It might be 7 for Judson. It might be. They discovered it doesn't necessarily have to be 10. And why 2 units? Why not 1? So the hospitals put all these patient blood management programs in place, and we started seeing, as the previous slide showed, demand started plunging. On the supply side, that's bad enough if you're running a business that demand is going away. But on the supply side, supply was taking off. On the supply side, the FDA came along and said that 16-year-olds can donate. Now think back to when you're in high school. Would you rather be sitting in your calculus class, or would you rather just go donate some blood and get out of class, and you can do all the histrionics that go along with that? You can pretend like you fainted. You don't feel good. You can get out for the rest of the day. So demand was going down. The supply was taking off. And this is an actual curve that I put together and presented at an America's Blood Center meeting, and this is pretty much the response I got. It's like, he's standing between us and the bar. When's he going to shut up and sit down so we can move on? I took this back to the board and said, we need to think about selling our blood center. And it's like, who's going to buy a nonprofit blood center? Well, we sold it in December 27th. I wanted to check the first day I could get it. We sold it on December 27th, 2012. We got just under $30 million for it. Today, we've distributed over $19 million since then in scholarships and research grants. Today we have $35 million. And in a minute, Judson's going to show you what happened, or I can show you what happened to blood centers. This is when all this happened. So those supply and demand curves that Dr. Edwards and other people teach, they actually have some value if you use them in terms of running your business. By the way, to continue the story, we sold it for $30 million. The company that we sold it to was later acquired, and less than 2 years later, it sold back to the Red Cross for $15 million. So in less than 2 years, it had dropped to less than half the price. This is what prices was BCA calculated prices should have been. Prices stayed flat. And you want me to keep going?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Keep going. There's operating margin. This is the big one. We went from 75 independent blood centers in 2011 to 44 in 2025. That's how many independent blood centers went away as a result of the changes in supply and demand. And then all this chaos you see that I presented earlier, we should have flipped the order. But all this chaos is what followed after that. Everybody's trying to figure out how to deal with it and to remain nimble. But I don't see that duplicating cost and duplicating service and taking away more of my time from running the blood center to go to 6 different meetings when it could all be done in one place. I don't see how that's helping. Yes, ma'am. Sure.
Did they merge or they just went?
Okay, so her question is, did they merge or did they just go away? They did merge, so they didn't go away. But what happened in most of the cases, we sold ours, okay? I started getting all kind of calls, can you come talk to my board? And it's like, the window's closed. You know, we were at the top of our game when we sold the blood service. We were doing really well. These centers here, most of them waited till it was too late. You don't sell a business when you're at the bottom. You go to somebody, especially when you're a nonprofit. You know, you go to somebody and you say, will you take me over just so that we don't go out of business? So what really broke my heart is to see millions of assets that these community blood centers had built up go out of that community and now belong to the large systems that had the ability to put cash into them to keep them afloat, if that answers your question. Okay. Next one. So we went from, well, actually 82. So the future perspective, Judson, you want to talk about that? Or we can go light with that.
Yeah.
It's really whether donors should get compensated or not.
Yeah, this is the question. You know, when you think about the competition with the plasma industry, I mean, you're all kind of attacking that base, right? And there's so many of people that do give blood. How many in the audience give blood on a regular basis? There's a few of you that do that. I think what has happened is now the industry itself is they might not be giving you money because the FDA will not allow them to give you money, but they'll give you a $25 gift card or a $50 gift card for donating.
Free haircut.
Free haircut?
Really, free haircut?
Yeah, great clips for
I mean, is that crazy? But I mean, you know, that's where like the argument when you think about it is, in my mind, is like, that's not really donated blood. To me, like donation, if you're getting something in return, it's a transaction. So when you look at what's happening going forward in the industry, you know, we've talked very little about the hospital side and the actual customer side of the equation. I mean, they're also in a situation where they're doing so many more of these group buying agreements and these big hospital systems that they can dictate a lot of prices and the way these things are done on their own. And so when you look at this change, like one of the things I know that we talked about when we look at what's going to happen is the innovation for a lot of the larger blood centers. It's a game of scale. You know, I don't know how many more of these independent blood centers where they are right now are going to be able to thrive. I guess, what's the smallest one out there, Bob, that you can remember?
In terms of revenue, probably around 25 million today.
And so you can just, like we were discussing the idea of the expense with the cost in blood bags going up. I mean, the more that these things ratchet up and the more prices change, the harder it is for these smaller independent centers to compete. And so when you look at that market, I just don't see much option except for continued consolidation. I mean, because the Red Cross, the other thing that's interesting about the Red Cross too is, unlike a blood center, they can diversify their income base. You know, they're doing a lot more than just, you know, collecting blood and distributing blood. They get direct government payments for some of the work that they do, and so you really, you know, through a 990 you can tell something about a company, but with the Red Cross it's still very, very difficult to understand all of their revenue sources and where they spend it. But, you know, what some of the research is showing right now is that, you know, people's attitude toward donating blood has changed. And so the idea of being paid for blood is not a bad idea, and they're doing it more and more. And so for the industry itself, that's why when we think about you know, trying to keep up that relationship between plasma, and there's even products between the plasma industry and those that are currently with blood centers that are interchangeable products. I mean, they're both kind of selling to the same market in some places. So it's challenging times for sure.
It's just really kind of how much.
And then, some of the researchers sitting there talking about how much is it worth, 25, seems like around $15 to $25 seems to be a pretty good number for people to donate a unit of blood. And overall, the yes or maybe 80%, 53% said yes. So this is going to have a huge impact on these blood centers. And so they're already operating at very thin margins. And so with this idea that donors are expecting some type of compensation for this, and the big ones can do it, what will happen? I think, and my belief is that it's just going to be more and more consolidation and scale in the industry over time. I just don't see that being able to do anything different. And as we look forward and for more research, I mean, there's constant research out there on supply chains and trying to be more efficient in the movement of blood. So much is out there right now, but there's still a lot of work that could be done. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to what does the Red Cross do? And what does the Red Cross do? Everything is kind of dependent on their actions. And so I have had the opportunity to speak at, like I spoke at a conference with the relationship with the military and in the event of disasters, of disaster preparation. And there's things like, frozen blood units, and there's a lot more science to this than I know about. But, as far as the supply and demand components and how you price things, things like whole blood have made a big comeback here recently. I don't know if you've read about that, about being able to, and on the military battlefield, they carry whole blood units when they go out to a scene and try to help a fallen soldier, that the impact that it has on saving lives. There's a group that's out there now that's looking at trying to get the government to make investments so that whole blood could be carried on ambulance services. So if they go out to a scene, to actually have blood with them that they don't have right now. So there's some of those things that are happening on a larger scale. But for the industry itself, the complications that we talk about in this land of confusion, I mean, those first 10 minutes of slides will tell you. And it's not like all of those different things, as Bob said, are different people. They're all the same people, in all of these different organizations. And in my mind, what it demonstrates to you is, I use the word desperation, is there's so much of a groupthink, but at the same time, they're competing with each other every day and sharing resources. And it is just it's a confusing market for sure. But as you go forward, you can see the price fixing. I say price fixing. It could work in another direction too, but the Red Cross pretty much fixes the price of the market, and it's up to these independent blood centers to either adapt to that price and survive, or like what you've seen over the past 10 years is they'll just take the keys and hand them to somebody else and say, here you go, you can have the state of Arkansas or whatever. But, yeah.
What's the shelf life?
Can I answer?
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
It depends on the product. The shelf life of a red cell is about 42 days, and it depends on, let's just say about 42 days. The shelf life of platelets has been about 5 days, or now it's 7 days, I think. It depends on bacterial testing that you do, but it's a very short shelf life. And then the shelf life of plasma, you freeze it, so a year or greater.
That's not very long.
It's not very long.
So did you find that you were having to discard?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, Dr. Edwards talked about this, and we just didn't have time to get into so many different things. Dr. Edwards was talking about compensated donors, and this is going to be one of the interesting things for us to look at. I do a lot of consulting with the plasma industry. These guys, they've got their act together. Being a college campus, you may see a plasma center open up, and then 8 months later it's gone. If they've got enough plasma, they expand and contract their capacity to collect based on what the demand is. They don't just collect. Okay, running a blood center, and I get asked this question, and Judson's challenged me on this many times. We've had this discussion a lot. Why do you collect an APOS? You know, so blood centers, the transfusion service is collecting every donor that walks in the door. So when an APOS comes in here, we would know that we had plenty in inventory, but you collect them anyway because you can get the plasma out of it at least. And the real answer to it is that recruiting donors is the hardest part, and it's a big expense for blood centers. The plasma guys just pay you, okay? You come in, they test your blood, they know what your blood type is, and they get some demographics about you, and they just pay you, and that's a pretty cool model. And if you are a loyal, and you show that, you actually get more money if you show up on time. You know, did you keep your appointment? You get rewards for that. In the blood industry, when you're depending on volunteer donors, that's a lot different. You're asking somebody, let me stick a 16 gauge needle in your arm. That's a big old needle, all right? And so that's one of the hardest parts for a blood service. Well, when the blood centers go to a campus or they go to a business or wherever, and somebody comes in, and first of all, you don't know what their blood type is most of the time because the repeat donors is very low. So you don't know what their blood type is, so you have to take them to see what it is. But even if you know this person's an A-pos and you say, we don't really need that today, they're going to go back and tell them, oh, they don't need any blood today. They just turned me away. And a lot of times people, we would turn them, I actually did a study on this. We have to defer donors for low hemoglobin. And so when you defer a donor for low hemoglobin, they can go eat some liver and they'll be fine next week. They can come in and donate, but I'll talk to people, oh, I can't donate. Well, what's wrong? Well, 6 years ago I went in to donate and they told me I didn't have enough iron. Well, you probably had enough iron, 3 days later. But once you turn someone away, trying to get them to come back, so blood centers just take everybody that walks in the door. But now that, as Dr. Edwards was talking about, they're moving towards this compensated model. And we had a slide, back up just one. See, this is a picture I took. Is that a compensated donor or not? I mean, that's not a rhetorical question. If you think that's a compensated donor, raise your hand. It's an informal survey. So do I. Adam Smith would. But the FDA says that's not a compensated donor. Now, the price is getting driven up to $50. I'm just as puzzled by it as you are. I had dinner last night with another economist, and we were talking about getting with Dr. Edwards and writing a paper on this. That is a compensated donor. I don't care what you say. The FDA rule says you can't, whatever you give someone, it can't be converted to cash. I can sell a $20 gift card to you for $15 probably, right? I could take the T-shirt that I get and go sell it for something if it's a really cool T-shirt. Anyway, so I'm wondering what's going to happen in the blood industry. I cautioned my colleagues and the economists that I have two economists on the board. Dr. Edwards has just joined our board. We have another economist. And we have a lot of discussion about taking everybody comes in, why not just pay donors? The concern that I have is that as these centers that are dependent on volunteer donors start compensating donors, are they going to force donors to start thinking, now wait a minute, I can get $50 over here at the plasma center, I'm going to get $20 over here, in the blood mobile, I'll just go to the plasma center. Now the transfusion guys, they would look down sometimes on the plasma centers. We don't want anything to do with those guys. They pay their donors and so forth. Those guys really, I've been to their meetings, I've done consulting work with them. They do a really good job of promoting what it is that they do with their donors and their constituency. They save lives. I think they're great. Try living without, some of their products like IVIG or some of the other products, or if you're hemophiliac, try living without the factors that they're producing. They're life-saving products. So what if they are for profit? Big deal. And I'm concerned, and I wonder what's going to happen as the blood centers start compensating donors and put themselves in a competitive market with these plasma centers. Are they going to force donors or cause donors to start making a comparison? And if I'm a rational person doing I guess you can't call it a philanthropic act anymore, donating blood, I'm going to go where I can get the most for it, I guess. I don't know. Maybe you would act differently. Yes, ma'am?
It seems like they've completely forgotten about the end user.
These are some of the most dedicated people you will ever meet, and they are very patient-driven. And they're very attentive to their donors. And when I put the slides up showing all the duplication, and Judson used the word desperation, I think they're just trying to deal with what started happening in 2012 and 2013 when we went from 80-something centers down to 40-something centers, and they saw so many have to consolidate. And there were these old guys like me that had been running blood centers for 35 years, and suddenly they're working for, I don't want to name, they're working for the big guys, and they're just a subsidiary. I think they're worried about that, and that's why this desperation in creating all these organizations trying to deal with it. And I think we're going to see that contract back at some point. I certainly hope so, because you just think about trying to go to all those meetings. One of my board members was the medical director at an independent blood center. She just recently became the CEO, and she was going to retire last year because she wasn't seeing her children enough. Now she's the CEO, and I talked to her. She said, all I do is go to meetings. She said, I go to meetings 3 a week, 3 a month, and I never see my kids. I'm having to work at night. So I think we're going to see this contract at some point. But I think right now the industry is trying to come to grips with things, and hopefully through some of the research and maybe some writings we can help them come to grips.
But one thing I'll say Bob didn't give himself enough credit for is that, and one thing I've learned from working a lot of these blood centers, most of these directors do not have business acumen whatsoever. They're there for, which is not wrong. I mean, they're there for, the life saving and, for the medical side. And so they move up and they get put into a position where they're having to all of a sudden manage a blood center. And so when you think about new research topics and new research ideas, we've talked about this idea of kind of looking at the, the background of these blood center managers to see, how many of them are, MBAs, how many of them are MDs, and how do they run their business? Because, and we'll close this out and you can ask some questions, but, the whole point of this was the complexity of the industry. There's no question it's super complex. And so as a CEO or manager of each of these independent blood centers, you are kind of walking the line between, trying to focus on an altruistic mission of being a blood center and being a business that can survive and make business decisions and make money. Bob knows much better than I do, but just in the meetings I've had, when you mention the idea of making money at a blood center, it's like they just want to pass out on the floor. Like, that's terrible. That's a terrible thing to do. We can't make money. We're here to save lives. You can't save lives if you're out of business. And there's some basics there's basics to running these organizations that I think there's some that are great. There's some that are great, but I also think that there's some that focus on maybe a little too much on the mission side and not able to handle the complexity of the business side. But
Are they all non-for-profit?
They are. There was an attempt made once, maybe twice, to start for-profit centers. They failed quickly, and I don't know why, but they are all not-for-profit.
I've thought of some. Hold on, Charlie. Go ahead, Charlie. Go ahead. No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I wasn't sure if we were going to go to that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
But, I was thinking back to the very beginning where you mentioned it kicked off with World War II and a lot of going to the fields and things like that. Was the military, not just the hospital, but was the military a large demand source for the initial blood going out? And then I'm thinking from that point on, the decline, if a major, let's just say a major war or something like that, would the demand for the blood in our country go to other parts of the world, other countries, and demand spike back up again for that?
Let me try to answer that. So the military was beneficial. That's where transfusion medicine took off, was in the battlefield. And physicians, again, around the country saw, hey, that's working in the battlefield, let's bring it to the private hospitals in the United States. And so that's when that happened. They will come together. And the interorganizational task force works well. Burke actually works well. Burke has responded to the small emergencies. For example, One Blood recently got hit with a ransomware. And so all the Burke centers responded and made certain that Florida got blood. But to answer your question, yeah, I think if there is another war like that, there have been blood drives for Ukraine. I think we will see blood drives for the battlefield, just to give you the short answer. I think we can see that again. Other questions? Well, thank you for donating blood, and thank you for listening to us today, but thank you for donating. As you can see, we've got plenty of material to work with as we go forward with our research.
And there's plenty of smart people in this audience. If you're looking for some research topics, stop by sometime, and I can bore you to death with whatever you want to try to do. Yes, sir.
With all the testing that goes on, and I can remember when AIDS first became big and all that happened, but, you know, they asked me, have you been outside the country in the last X amount of months? And, you know, with all the testing, why can't we just compensate for that as well during the testing process? If you're worried about malaria or some god-awful disease, but why is that still one of the requirements? You know, as global as we are today, why is that still?
Why do we still ask questions about travel?
Yes.
Okay. And we ask questions about travel. This is another problem with donating blood. We ask blood centers, I don't do it anymore, ask questions about travel, your sex habits, have you shared drugs, and that sort of thing. And the reason is there's a window period. I just had COVID recently, a month ago. I don't have COVID. But I picked, so here's the best example. I picked up COVID somewhere, all right? And the virus was in my body, and it was starting to copy. Viruses copy. It was starting to copy, but I would not show up on the test yet because I would not have enough copies in my system. So that same thing applies to HIV, HCV, and other viruses, other diseases, or bad things that are in the blood, and it's called the window period. The testing is just not sensitive enough to pick it up, but it's in your blood, so you can eliminate people out of the blood supply that may be at risk because they're still in that window period and the test won't pick it up. Have I answered your question? Yes. I'll tell you the worst place. So if you ever need blood, what you don't want to do, here's Bob's rules. You can use them or not use them. I don't want to have the family drive or the Sunday school drive. Okay? The reason is we ask those questions for a good reason. So if I've been out of town and I did something I was not supposed to do, okay? I don't. But if I did something I was not supposed to do, when I go in that little room and I sit down, that person, they ask me questions about my sex habits, or if I walk out of here and I don't donate blood, my wife's going to ask me, why weren't you eligible to donate? Nope, I haven't done anything. So I go out and I donate, and that has happened. And we actually had an HIV transmission in our blood center. It was a donor that had engaged in some risky sexual behavior. He was embarrassed to admit it. And he didn't, but when he came in, and he was in the window period, and he came in the next donation, he tested positive for HIV. And it was up to us to go back and find everybody that had gotten his blood products, and he had transmitted HIV. We were sued, we were found not guilty. I mean, the donor lied.
Isn't that a felony?
No, there was nothing, no. There was nothing done for that. But that's why those questions are asked, and it's a good reason for doing it. So I don't want to have the family or the Sunday school blood drive. And my other rule is if I've got the strength to reach up there and turn that little valve and turn it off, I don't need it. So, I mean, I think the blood supply is incredibly safe. It's as safe as it's ever been, but there's stuff in the blood that we don't know what it is. Okay? Other questions that Dr. Edwards or I can answer? I want to close out by a positive statement. The RAND group did a study many years ago of the sustainability of the blood supply, and they concluded that as chaotic as it looks, it really works. And there are some of the most dedicated people you'll find in healthcare running these blood centers, and they work hard. They're very dedicated to what they do, and despite what you see in a lot of the confusion and a lot of the competition, when there is a disaster, these people come together like you've never seen. Like in Florida recently with the ransomware, they all got blood. They took their excess blood and they sent it to One Blood so that Florida would have shut down. You stop and you think, you don't even do elective surgery when there's no blood because you might nick something. They made certain that those people got blood. So I stand in awe of them. And it's easy to sit back and throw stones at it because I don't have to do this anymore. But these are some of the most dedicated people you'll ever see, and I think they'll figure it out in the long run. So I'm going to stop with that.
Thank you. hope you enjoyed it.